Let us begin the game. Theater, an interactive night of horror. Copyright 1995 by Cave Rock Software Limited. All rights reserved. Press any key to continue. ... Let's do that. Alright, this is the first screen after the title screen, beginning the game. In square brackets it reads, first of all, on the top of the screen, there is a description of each scene. In this scene, the room is called the theater lobby. Square brackets. Instructions and other information is available by typing help at the right, I guess it's called triangular bracket prompt, and pressing enter or return. The paragraph goes on to read, another day, another dollar. Life is good at the moment. The property market is booming. Still, it does have its downside. When showing those Mueller Corporation executives around that old theater dump, opportunity, you must have left your page down in the basement. Better hurry. You have to meet the others at the opera in an hour. And be careful, it wouldn't do to show up with your clothes all dirty. Now we have the subheading. It reads in big bold white letters, Theater Lobby. This room is a tribute to the now faded glory of the theater. The still, smiling faces of forgotten productions stare out from faded posters at you. An old, grand staircase leads up, while the exit lies to the south. Small, private doors lead northeast and northwest. What do you want to do now? ? So there we have the triangular brackets and a white cursor, square cursor to indicate the game is waiting for my response. I'm going to type the word help. So now we've been directed to the theater help menu. Help is available for the following, : First of all, we have details about the authors. Next, we have version and released information. Next, we have copyright and other legal dribble. Next, we have help for beginners. And after that, we have list of special commands. Next, after that, we have general hints for novice players. Help me. I am stuck. Help me, I am generally stuck. Story of the lyric theater. And how do you start the game? ? On the top of the screen we have theater help menu. The letter N equals next subject. The word return equals read subject. To the far right of the page, the letter P equals previous, and the letter Q equals resume game. Theater credits. Theater was designed and written by Brendon Wyber. However, theater would not have come to existence without the efforts of several people. Graham Nelson created the Inform compiler, which is the text adventure game development system used to create this game. Because Inform is such an integral part of the game system, Graham gets co-author credits. But please don't bother him with problems about the game itself. It wasn't his fault. Third paragraph. Theater was valiantly beta tested by Paul Jansen, Michael Quignon, J. Larios, Paul Ledoux, Mike Oliphant, Andrew C. Plotkin, Gareth Reese, Steve Salter, Richard Scipione, or Scipione, if I pronounced that correctly, Andy Smith, Stephen Van Egmond, and The Adder. Quote-unquote, post-release debugging was performed by Richard Barnett, Bozzy, Robert A. DeLisle, Robert M. DeCaw, Paul David Doherty, Martin Dunspan, Jason Dyer, Chris Malone, Michael S. Phillips, Nayu Chizu, NYUCHEZUU, Shampoo, and Dan Shiovitz, as well as Todd from Virginia, Jacob Solomon Weinstein, Jerry Kevin Wilson, and many others. Mark Howell wrote the interpreter, brackets known as zip, which is commonly used to run this game. The implementors from Infocom designed the Z machine, which is the standard used by Inform and Zip, It asks to press the enter for more information. And finally, Joel Furr wrote a short story on the lyric theater, which inspired this game. This story is included in the game under the topic Story of the Lyric Theater. Any comments or bug reports are always welcome. Cave Rock's internet email address is the quickest and easiest method for contact. However, a mail address is also given. Brendan@caverock.co.nz and mail: Cave Rock Software Limited. Attention: Brendon Wyber, P.O. Box 22-488, Christ Church, New England. Square brackets, please press space. Next on the list of the help menu, version and release information. Theater version history. In big, bold, capital letters, Theater. An interactive night of horror. Written by Brendon Wyber and Graham Nelson. Copyright 1995 by Cave Rock Software Limited. All rights reserved. The actual game Theater was designed by Brendon Wyber. Theater Release 2, brackets, serial number 951203/build1062. You are playing Theater on Interpreter 4 version F. Theater was written using the Inform compiler by Graham Nelson. Inform compiler V1502 brackets library release number 5/12 / serial number 951024. This is the second release of Theater. It has been recompiled to use the latest version of the Inform library and language. This has fixed several bugs, square bracket, and probably introduced a few more, smiley face. Several corrections have been made fixing both grammar and spelling errors, as well as some bugs found in the first release. This version contains some new responses to unanticipated inputs, but contains no new locations, puzzles, or objects. Square brackets, more. Italics title, old version information. Theater release 1, brackets, serial number 950721 / build 1050. Inform compiler V1501, brackets, library release number 5/10 / serial number 950525. Released on the 27th of August, 1995 to the ftp.gmd.de interactive fiction brackets adventure game archive site maintained by Volker Blasius. This is the first released. Enjoy. Please press space. Next on the help menu, copyright and other legal dribble. Theater legal dribble, says the top of the page. Goes on to read, Theater is copyright 1995 by Cave Rock Software Limited. All rights reserved. The Lyric Theater short story is copyright 1989. Joel Furr. Theater is copyright, but permission is given for this game to be freely distributed by any and all possible means. Note, no costs may be charged except for the distribution costs. In the author's opinion, if you paid for this program and you didn't get it on a CD-ROM filled with other programs, you have been cheated. Although this game uses the data file format of Infocom's Z Machine, it contains no code that was written by them. Square brackets, please press space. Next on the help menu list, we have Introduction to Text Adventures, also known as Help for Beginners. In the square brackets, it reads, when you see the square brackets, put a quote more, prompt, brackets, or something similar, just press any key to continue, ... First paragraph. Theater is a text-only adventure game. These are basically large and complex logic puzzles presented in a form of a story in which you are the central character. In theater, you are a property developer who, in the progress of attempting to sell an old, disused theater, leaves an electronic pager in the basement. Later on, when you come back to retrieve it, you become trapped by the theater's denizens. To win, you must escape. But before you can do that, you must learn its secrets. When you play theater, the computer will describe to you your surroundings, and then you type in at the greater than or the arrow bracket, quote unquote, prompt what you want to do. Pressing return or enter when finished. No time will pass in the game until you press return or enter, so you can take your time deciding what to do. Since it is easiest to learn from example, what follows is a transcript showing the typical things that can happen in a game like theater. Note that this is a made-up example, and the following does not appear in theater. The comments which appear in this style of print are not part of the example and are directed at you. Also, what the player types in appears in uppercase letters, but in fact when playing the game it doesn't really matter, upper lowercase text, which case you'll use. Square brackets, more. Introduction to Text Adventures. Before you is Wellington House, site of the famous Red Lady Ghost. You now regret your bet to stay overnight in this miserable dump, but you couldn't really back down in front of everyone after opening your big mouth about how ghosts could never exist. Now you have to stay in the cold all night, with nothing to look forward to except the inevitable break-in by the others and their lame attempts to scare you. Let's hope they bring some decent beer with them. ... Big bold letters, title reads, or subtitle, Haunted. A non-interactive instruction by Brendon Wyber. Version 6.66. New players should type in help. Dedicated to level 9 computing fans everywhere. Next subheading in big bold letters or upper lowercase bold letters, the driveway. Weeds choke this overgrown driveway, obscuring the view of the house. Tall trees surround you, giving you an intense feeling of isolation. The driveway winds north. What do you want to do now? ? And the prompt reads, after that it reads in capital letters, go north. Square bracket, more. Continuing the article. Continuing the article. Introduction to Text Adventures. Subheading, in front of the house. Before you was Wellington House itself. What do you want to do now? Type in north or N. Square brackets. Obviously, you would soon tire of typing go north all the time, so you can abbreviate that to a simple N. The other compass direction are abbreviated also. Subheading in front of the house. Before you is Wilmington House itself. Once this place would have been very regal and grand, but now after years of neglect it is ruined. Vines cover the house in a thick web. The large front door, leading in to the north, has a brass knocker on it. The driveway leads to the south. What do you want to do now? In the prompt, type in. Square brackets. Obviously, you would soon tire of typing go north all the time, so you can abbreviate that to a simple N. The other compass direction are abbreviated also. Next, the large front door blocks your way. What do you want to do now? Prompt, open door. The large front door is locked, and you do not have the key. Square brackets, more. Continue with the article, Introduction to Text Adventures. What do you want to do now? In the prompt, type push door. The door does not budge. What do you want to do now? The prompt, type kick door. The door looks pretty solid. Violence isn't the answer. Square brackets in italics. Here, the player has encountered the first puzzle, getting into the actual house. Puzzles are not obstacles, but are challenges. Usually, if you are stuck on a particular puzzle and seem to be getting nowhere, you need to try a different approach. What do you want to do now? In the prompt, type the letter L. Square brackets in italics. L is an abbreviation for look around, which will redisplay the description of the current location. Square brackets, more. Text Adventures continued article. In front of the house. Before you is Wilmington House itself. Once this place would have been very regal and grand, but now after years of neglect it is ruined. Vines cover the house in a thick web. The large front door, leading into the north, has a brass knocker on it. The driveway leaves to the south. What do you want to do now? In the prompt, type in knock on the door. You knock on the door, but your knuckles produce only a soft, rapping noise. What do you want to do now? In the prompt, type in knock on the door with the brass knocker. The brass knocker made a loud and deep knocking noise that reverberates through the entire house. You can hear a noise from inside the house. What do you want to do now? In the prompt, type in wait. And now, in square brackets, more. Continuing on the article, Introduction to Text Adventures. Time passes. ... You can hear something moving towards the door. It is making a slithering, hissing noise. What do you want to do now? In the prompt, type in wait. Time passes. ... You can hear a slithering from just behind the door. What do you want to do now? In the prompt, type in wait. Time passes. ... Paragraph reads, the front door opens and a madness-inducing mass of tentacles and slime emerges. You are paralyzed with fear and cannot even scream as the tentacles close around you. ... Square brackets, more. Continuing on Introduction to Text Adventures. Continuing the article, 3 asterisks. You have died. 3 asterisks. Next paragraph. Do you want to restart, restore a save game, or quit? In the prompt, type in restart. Square brackets. Sometimes, if things go hideously wrong, you can die. Fortunately, unlike real life, you can just try again. Next paragraph. Before you is Willington House, site of the famous Red Lady ghost. You now regret your bet to stay overnight in this miserable dump, but you couldn't really back down in front of everyone after opening your big mouth about how ghosts could never exist. Now you have to stay in the cold all night with nothing to look forward to except the inevitable break-in by the others and their lame attempts to scare you. Let's hope they bring some decent beer with them. ... In big bold letters, subheading haunted. Square brackets, more. Introduction to Continue the article, Introduction to Text Adventures. A non-interactive instruction by Brendon Wyber, version 6.66. New players should type in help, dedicated to level 9 computing fans everywhere. Subheading, The Driveway. Weeds choke this overgrown driveway, obscuring the view of the house. Tall trees surround you, giving you an intense feeling of isolation. The driveway winds north. What do you want to do now? ? Type in the prompt N. Subheading, In front of the house. Before you was Willington House itself. Once this place would have been very regal and grand, but now after years of neglect it is ruined. Vines cover the house in a thick web. The large front door leading in to the north has a brass knocker on it. The driveway leads to the south. What do you want to do now? In the prompt, type in examine vines. Square brackets, more. Introduction to Text Adventures, continued on the article. They look rather sturdy and completely entangle the house. What do you want to do now? ? Type in climb vines, and the subheading reads, On the roof. You are high up on the roof of Willington House. You can see all around you the overgrown and neglected Willington estate. Vines lead down, while an open window leads west. What do you want to do now? ? Type in the prompt west, or W. Subheading darkness. It is too dark in here to see anything. What do you want to do now? In the prompt, type in E. On the roof. Square brackets, more. T1 Introduction to Text Adventures. You are high up on the roof of Willington House. You can see all around you the overgrown and neglected Willington estate. Vines lead down, while an open window leads west. What do you want to do now? In the prompt, type in inventory. In italic letters, square brackets, inventory, brackets usually abbreviated to I, lists all the things that you are carrying. You are carrying a tourist map of Paris, a flashlight, and a set of cards. What do you want to do now? The prompt, type in examine the cards. You brought these along in case you got bored. What do you want to do now? Prompt, type in examine the flashlight. You thought this may come in handy. It is currently switched off. Square brackets, more. Continuing the article, Introduction to Text Adventures. What do you want to do now? ? Turn the flashlight on. The flashlight emits a steady beam of light. What do you want to do now? In the prompt, type in west, or W. Subheading attic. The attic is a maze of old storage boxes and other dust-covered junk. A closed trapdoor leads down. On one of the boxes rests an old bird cage. A cupboard sits in the corner. A ladder rests against the wall. What do you want to do now? Square brackets, more. Continue on Introduction to Text Adventures. MB. In the prompt, type in take cage. Bird cage, taken. What do you want to do now? Prompt, examine cupboard. Old and wooden. It is currently closed. What do you want to do now? In the prompt, type in open it. Italic, square brackets. Generally, for convenience, you can refer to the last object you referred to as it. You open the cupboard, revealing an old robe, a suitcase, an umbrella, and a small mirror. You also notice some writing on the cupboard door. What do you want to do now? Prompt, read writing. Square brackets, more. Continue on the article. Quote unquote, shelter I offer to the cursed, unlucky or damned. What do you want to do now? In the prompt, type in enter cupboard. Strangely, as you attempt to enter the cupboard, you seem to be repelled by a strange, unseen force. What do you want to do now? Prompt, take everything from cupboard. Square brackets, to save time, many verbs allow you to use capital everything instead of forcing you to specify each individual object. Old robe, taken. Suitcase, taken. Umbrella, taken. Small mirror, taken. What do you want to do now? Square brackets, more. Continuing the article, and the prompt, type in open the umbrella. You open the umbrella. Square brackets, you feel a little unlucky. What do you want to do now? In the prompt, type in break the mirror. The mirror shatters. Square brackets, you feel even more unlucky. What do you want to do now? In the prompt, type in walk under the ladder. You walk under the ladder. Square brackets, you feel a really unlucky now. Square brackets, more. Continuing on the Introduction to Text Adventures help article, you walk under the ladder, you feel unlucky now, and what do you want to do now? In the prompt, type in enter cupboard. Strangely, you are allowed entry now into the cupboard. As you get into it, you notice it seems quite deep. You move further into it, and it seems to get even bigger and bigger until you realize it has become another place. ... Subheading, the hall. You are in a large wooden hall. ... Excuse me. Square brackets, italic, hopefully you get the idea of the style of play now. I'll have a glass of water. Hopefully you get the idea of the style of play now. Do not feel too disillusioned if the quote-unquote unluck puzzle above seems a little unfair or far-fetched. It is only an example. For most of the harder puzzles in theater, there will be subtle hints and clues as well. Square brackets, please press space.
Next we have list of special commands. Special commands. Here is a list of some of the most common and useful commands that are used in theater. Movement. To move about, you simply say go, go, and supply a compass direction. For example, go north. You can also go up and go down. Enter ing and climbing things may also move you about. Since movement is so common, the current abbreviations are provided. N for go north. S for go south. E for go east. W for go west. NE for go northeast. NW for go northwest. SE for go southeast. SW for go southwest. U for go up. And D for go down. Next subheading, looking around. Square brackets more. Special commands continued. To redisplay the current location, go look around or L. You can also examine objects as well as look under, look behind, and look inside them. Extra descriptions may be given by look up and look down. Of course, there are also other senses than sight. Listen, touch, and taste will also work. Other things might require a bit of a search to uncover their secrets. Next subheading, interacting with objects. Scattered about the theater are several objects that will help you. To get them, you simply take them. Naturally, when you don't want an object anymore, simply drop it. Some objects are containers which you can open and close. To see what you are carrying, type in inventory or I. Some objects come in containers. You can always take one object from another, as well as put an item into a container. Other things might be so big that you can enter them, and others you can push from location to location with a simple push object north. Next subheading, starting and stopping the game. Square brackets more. Special commands continued. When you have had enough, you stop the game by typing quit. You can also restart the game from the beginning as well. However, theater is a large game, so you may want to save your current place in the game so you can restore it later. When saving a game, you will be prompted for a file name. Saving a game allows you to store a snapshot, quote unquote, of the current game, remembering your score, where you are, and stuff like that. Using save, you can avoid having start from scratch all the time. Next subheading, understanding the parser. The parser is the computer algorithm used by the game to process what you type into something the game understands. Gen will understand the following types of sentences. Brackets verb. For example, save, jump, sleeve. We have brackets verb and brackets noun dash clause, square brackets more. Next section of special commands. For example, take the gun, read the green book, smell the roses, kiss Ellie, pull the lever. Brackets verb, brackets noun dash clause, brackets proposition, brackets second noun dash clause. For example, give the dash clause. For example, give the tasty food to the bear. Take the gold from the chest. Shoot Henry with the pistol. Put the battery into battery compartment. Shoot Henry with the pistol. Ask Bill about Windows 95. Brackets. Sometimes the preposition isn't necessary. Give beautiful woman the rose. Push trolley north. It is important to remember that you aren't talking to a real person, so it will not understand everything. The game will generally tell you when you have typed in something it doesn't understand. However, it may, of special commands, misinterpret your meaning. Below is a list of just some of the verbs it does understand. And these are the words that it understands, the verbs. Ask, burn, climb, close, drag, drop, eat, empty, enter, fill, give, hit, insert, jump, kiss, listen, lock, look, open, pray, pull, push, put, read, remove, rub, search, set, show, sing, sit, smell, sing, sit, smell, stand, swim, take, throw, tie, turn, unlock, wait, watch, wave, and wear. Note: this list is not complete. There are others as well. Square brackets more. Next section of special commands. Subheading reads Special Commands. The following are special commands. Again, brackets, abbreviated G, colon, repeats the previous command. Brief, colon. When you first enter a location, it will display its description. But from then on, when moving about, it will not. Full score displays the current score and also says where the points come from. Help, colon, displays the help menu. Inventory, brackets, abbreviated I, colon, will display what you are carrying. Look, brackets, abbreviated L, colon, displays the current location description, all of it, regardless of current, brief, / super brief, / verbose mode. Prompt, colon, turns the quote-unquote "what now?" prompt on and off. Square brackets more. Next section of special commands. Continuing on. Quit, quits the current game. Restart, restarts the game from the beginning. Restore, reloads a previously saved game. You will be prompted for a file name. Save, saves the game to disk. You will be prompted for a file name. Score, will display what your current score. I think that's a bit of a misspelling. I think it meant to say score is. Whatever. Moving on. Script, will of the game. Either saving it to a file in which case you will be prompted for a file name, or sending it directly to the printer, depending on which computer you are running this game on. Super brief, in super brief mode, the game will not display the full location description unless you type in look. Time, tells you what the current time is. It should be the word is, and they put the word it. You should have reviewed the spelling. Next on the list we have unscript, will stop the computer from scripting. Next word is more, square brackets. Moving on to the last section of special commands. Score, will display what your current score is. Script, will start saving the actual text of the game, either saving it to a file, brackets, in which case you will be prompted for a file name, or sending it directly to the printer, depending on which computer you are turning this game on. Super brief, in super brief mode, the game will not display the full location descriptions unless you type in look. Time, in look. Time, tells you what current time it is. Unscript will stop the computer from scripting. Next we have verbose, in verbose mode, the computer will display the full description of a location when you move about. This is the default mode. Version, displays the version information about the game. Wait, brackets, abbreviated to Z, will make time pass in the game while you don't actually do anything. Square brackets, please press space. So this continues, this concludes the section on. Next on the theater help menu, general hints for novice players. General hints. Number 1, draw a map. It should list the location names and the objects in them. It helps to stop you forgetting about things. 2, pick up everything you can. It could be useful later. 3, examine everything. Looking closer at the scenery may reveal hidden things and clues. Don't forget, you can look up and look down, as well as look behind and under things. 4, If you are really stuck, you can always look at the help menu again. You will notice that it will change to reflect the current state of the game. 5. Play with a friend. Play the game with a friend. What is difficult for you may be obvious for them. 6. The author is a big fan of secret doors. There are 3 near the start, and also what may seem to be an impassable barrier might not be. 7. There are some things that you cannot do until you become trapped inside the theater. Going up the lobby stairs is just one example. Square brackets, more. Continuing on the general hints. 7. There are some things that you cannot do until you become trapped inside the theater. Going up the lobby stairs is just one example. So I believe I may have repeated that point. Square brackets, please press space. Next on the theater help menu. Help me. I am generally stuck. And there's a subheading that reads General Hints. You have barely begun the game. Just get the pager and leave the theater. It really is that simple. Square brackets, please press space. I suppose this help menu here, this section here, will tell you a different answer depending on the location of your character in the game. So it gives an appropriate help advice based on your location. So we have it to start the game. So we'll move on. And now it's time for, by far, the longest section in the theater help menu. Story of the lyric theater. Now you may want to have a nice hot steaming cup of cocoa or herbal tea and relax, because this is going to take a while. We're going to read a short story of the lyric theater. This is a rather long story that inspired this game. I would recommend that you turn on scripting with the script command before viewing this, so that you can reread it more easily later on. Do you still want to view this prompt? And I typed in yes. Let's do this. I'm ready. The lyric theater. Yes. Title: The Ghosts of the Lyric by Joel Furr with 2 R's. I wrote this a long time ago. A non-fiction chatty account of a cool old theater. It's not immortal prose, but I still got requests for it. So here's a repost for old times' sake. The ghost, plural, of the lyric, colon, square brackets more. Moving on. The lyric theater. Part 1, colon, the lyric theater, colon, an unusual place. Part 2, the ghosts of the lyric. Part 3, colon, the lyric today. Part 1, colon, the Lyric Theatre, an unusual place. The stories I have to tell you are set at the old Lyric Theatre in downtown Blacksburg, Virginia. The theater belonged to some friends of mine, the Kelseys, who had owned various incarnations of the business for decades. When I was just starting graduate school at Virginia Tech in 1988, the theater was past its prime, aging, soon to suffer a death blow when an 8-screen theater complex opened at a new mall south of London, of town. Pardon me. Still, the family held out and kept the place open, both out of pride, brackets, I think, and because the theater seemed to be the only thing keeping grandfather Kelsey alive. It was a nice old place, even if some of the seats were torn and the floor had a stickiness scrubbing couldn't completely eliminate. And some nights I would wander after class, got out at 10 p.m. to chat with with Beth Kelsey and her husband, Bud Bennett. Square brackets, more. Continuing part 1 of the Lyric Theatre short story. Beth had been a classmate of mine in high school, though we really hadn't become chatting friends until after graduation. She'd married Bud Bennett, 4 years her senior, in the summer of 1988, and the two of them worked days at the Virginia Tech Library, and then spent Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday evenings running the theater. They hated the necessity of spending 3 evenings a week watching the meager crowds trickle in and out. But since they worked unpaid, it permitted the theater to stay open a little while longer. Profitable once, the days of competition with the 8-screen complex at the mall and the burgeoning video rental businesses had reduced the Lyric to the point where the bank account balance spiraled downwards rather than creeping upwards or staying even. Without the clout to get the must-see movies, they showed what they could get, often having to show several also-rans as part of the package that brought them their rare popular film. I think he's referring to older films that already showed in the theater previously. These are slightly older movies. I wondered why the Kelseys kept the place open, since they knew full well that they would never make a profit again. One day I asked Beth, one day I asked. Beth explained to me that, to be quite honest, it was only until her grandfather died. Without the Lyric, he'd have no reason to exist. Even in his advanced years, he would wander down to the theater in the evening and poke uselessly around for a while before leaving. Evenings spent chatting with Beth and Bud while we waited for the late showing of whatever dubious blockbuster they had that week to finish generally included at least an hour of extensive complaining about the Virginia Tech students who vandalized the building during the day. When the university leased the space for large lecture classes, each evening's crew would find a few new depredations, whether it be Coca-Cola syrup, square brackets more, move on to the next page, emptied out into the snack counter floor. This is continued from the previous page. Or wooden tap dash boards shoved up under the carpet. Or graffiti written bathroom walls in magic marker. We called the students, quote unquote, ingrates, out of a sense of irritation with the casual way they destroy property that belonged to people who had never done them any harm. After Beth and Bud got that out of their systems, we'd chat about life for a while, and then the movie would end and the 20 or 30 patrons would wander out, and we'd close up. I felt odd about staying after closing with them, worried that they'd think that I had nowhere else to be. But I did enjoy talking, and truth to tell, they were about the only people outside my cluster of fellow students with whom I did get to talk on a regular basis. And it was interesting getting to go in the places most patrons wouldn't even know existed. A black stairwell that must have been used decades ago by black theater goers. The vast empty stage behind the movie screen where once, long ago, theatrical plays had been presented. The eerie crawl space under the stage where no one had much desire to explore. The boiler room with Russell's 55-gallon drum of stale popcorn. The odd crawl space above the projection booth where we found stacks of 1940s era phonograph records, hopelessly warped. There were all manner of little nooks and crannies in the lyric building, stuck as it was in the middle of a city block, part of one huge interconnected building that elsewhere had stores on the street level and apartments above. The lyric was owned by the Kelseys, but the land it sat on was the property of the HCMF Corporation, the local real estate barons with a finger in every pie and little interest in preserving a fine old movie theater when, square brackets more, moving on to the next page, the lyric theater story continued. There were rent checks to be cashed. The money had to be paid to HCMF, was in large part the reason for the perpetual cycle of weekly losses. And Beth and Bud believed that HCMF would like nothing better than to take the lyric and raise it and replace it with modern apartments, which would probably have made them a lot of money since the theater was a block from campus. Next paragraph. Nevertheless, Grandfather Kelsey was still hanging on, and while he was, the Kelseys managed to keep the place open via that they had money saved up from the flush years of decades past, and that they were paying the deficits out of that. But for all I really knew, they were taking out huge loans each week to keep paying the power bill. It wasn't the sort of thing I felt comfortable acquiring into. So while the place stayed open and the 1 dozen or 2 dozen people per night came in to see the movies the Lyric had to show, I dropped by as often as I felt doing and would chatter with Beth and Bud until 11 o'clock, when they'd look up and help them with closing. There were certain things that had to be done each evening, and eventually them, and was able to help out. They had to make sure everyone was out of the place, then lock up. Then Bud would go up to the projection booth and start the movie, feeding off the big platter it had collected onto and backwards onto another platter for the next showing. Or if the movie was being shipped out in the morning, we collect it into 2 massively heavy movie canisters and lug it down the back stairs to the street entrance. Beth would go down to the right side emergency exit passage and get the piles of wooden lap boards out for the students to use in classes. The square brackets more. Continue to the next page. Next day, and wheel out the overhead projector and microphone and slide projector and get them all set up. We take all the cups and napkins from the snack bar and lock them in a closet so the students wouldn't fill them with soft drink, quote unquote, post mix. Brackets, the syrup that gets combined with soda water to make the actual beverage, and splash it around, as they had done back in the days when Beth and Bud didn't know better than to leave the cups sitting out. Fortunately, the actual cleaning of the theater was not a chore we had to do. That was taken care of by an extremely old, senile man named Russell. Russell came in late at night, usually long after we left, and would clean out the spilled candy and popcorn and drinks and clean the restrooms and all the other distasteful things that one has to do in a place frequented by sloppy college students. Russell liked to collect things. Beth and Bud laughed hysterically when it occurred to them to show me his 55-gallon drum full of stale popcorn. Apparently, he took all the leftover popcorn from the evening's showings and collected it in the aforementioned drum, which he kept in the boiler room, a room accessed by a mostly hidden panel located in one of the emergency exit passageways. Beth had asked him about the drum full of popcorn, and Russell had told her that he saved it up for his quote-unquote pups. Pups? Beth had asked, and Russell had assured her that the dogs he raised for sale loved to eat the stale popcorn. Beth never failed to go into conniptions if you mentioned Russell's corn-fed quote-unquote pups. Russell also collected used drink cups, combs, burned out fluorescent light tubes, ... assortments of all of these would turn up in closets and storage areas and the back stairwell to eventually be thrown out by Beth or Bud or square brackets more. Moving on to the next page. Continue on the Lyric Theater, Part 1. One of the other theater employees. Once he had retrieved some burned out dusty, singed-looking fluorescent light tubes from the garbage, had stuck them in a box, marked the box quote-unquote new, and placed them safely away in a closet for future use. Beth and Bud eventually stopped trying to understand why he did these things, then simply took each newly found cachet as a pleasant discovery to be examined for possible actual usefulness, and then disposed of once the diagnosis had come up quote-unquote negative. Russell never seemed to mind. In fact, he seemed to be pleased when he noticed the absence of his prizes, and would take it as an impetus to search for new and even more interesting treasures. This concludes part 1 of the Lyric Theater short story. The Lyric Theater, Part 2, The Ghosts of the Lyric. This narrative will shortly take a turn into a more mysterious vein. But before I got to that part, I wanted to explain to you what kind of place the Lyric Theater was when I was spending some evenings there chatting with my friends. It was a nice old place, although it was disintegrating slowly. Beth and Bud were nice too. They were big Grateful Dead fans, frequent wearers of tie-dyed shirts. The sort of people who I figured would always be fairly happy, no matter what they were doing. I was glad I got to visit with them, and happy also that I got to look around the theater and find out about all the little cubby holes and dark corners that I'd never known about back when I was a kid and attending movies there. Square brackets more. Continuing on. Lyric Theater Day. It was a quiet night, and we'd long since shooed everyone out and locked the doors and gotten the day out for the morning's classes. All that remained was to stow the movie away, and we'd split. Perhaps to go over to the nearby cellar beer joint for a pitcher of something cold and effervescent. Then during a lull in the conversation, there came a loud shriek. Basically, what one would expect to hear if you had a banshee close at hand, coming from just outside the booth and over to the right-hand side of the balcony. All three of us reacted in the same way, We blinked and snapped our heads around to stare in the direction the noise had come from. "What the hell was that?" I asked, extremely startled by the volume of the shriek coming from what I had every reason to believe was a completely deserted balcony. Beth and Bud looked at each other, then at me, and then Beth shrugged and said, "We hear things like that all the time." "What is it?" I wondered, if it was some sort of equipment in the walls rasping against something. Even the skeptic, I was looking for a reasonable expectation before jumping to the conclusion that it was ghosts. Bud spoke up, matter-of-factly. "We assume it's a ghost. Like, there's no one in the theater, and even if someone had hidden in the restroom and snuck up here to scare us, they'd have no way to get out without coming to us and saying, 'Can I get out?' This was true, since even the emergency exits were locked at night for reasons I, square brackets more, continuing on the next page, wasn't sure of. Intrigued by the bland way Bud accepted the fact that a loud shriek had come from a deserted balcony in an empty, locked theater, I wondered what else had happened in the past to accustom them to such things going on. We assume that there's a woman's ghost haunting the building. Every so often, we hear her screaming from over in the direction of the ticket booth. Beth pointed down through the floor and to the right, in the approximate direction of both the ticket booth on the floor below and also the direction the scream had seemed to come from. I thought of it as more or less on the same floor as us. But then again, it hadn't lasted long enough to stop and triangulate its position. No kidding, I said. Does she ever say anything? Or does she just scream? I was being facetious, not expecting the answer I got. No, sometimes she says, "Let me out, let me out." I thought Beth was kidding, but from the look on her face, I realized that she wasn't. Now I began to get the impression that there really was more going on here than I had originally thought. I was, square brackets more, continue on to the next page, still mostly expecting to go downstairs after Bud finished and find something parked out on the street that could have made the noise we'd heard. But Beth take it as just another odd occurrence in a string of odd occurrences. The fact that all three of us had heard it and registered shock was another point in favor of it being something requiring more explanation than I had handy. Bud finished his work, and he and I each carried one of the heavy movie canisters down the back stairway to the street door. On the way, we passed many little openings stuffed full of old flyers and boxes of junk, and a door that was nailed shut, and more boxes of junk, and an opening that led off to a dead end, and so on down to the door. Where once I just poked around and wondered what all that stuff was kept lying around for, now I was eyeing the door and the dead end opening with a little suspicion and a little itchiness. Bud, for all that he had much more experience with the noises, could just as well have been walking down Main Street at high noon as using the dark, cluttered back stairway of a haunted theater at 11:30 in the evening. He didn't seem nervous or worried, so I just shrugged and went down and out to the street, where we met Beth coming out of the main doors and locking them behind her. Do you really hear things like that often? I asked. They maintained that they did. For two people who had to work three nights a week in a place where they had regularly heard eerie screams late at night, they were pretty composed, I thought. Square brackets more. Next page. We were all fairly tired that particular night, so we didn't stick around to discuss the quote-unquote ghosts. Beth and Bud went on home, and I went off home too and mulled it over. The next night, after class, I came back and sat in the foyer with them, and we talked about the ghosts. Beth said that there were actually 3 or 4 places within the theater that had ghosts or ghost-like phenomena associated with them. The first was the screaming woman, who usually just shrieked wordlessly, but sometimes screamed to be let out of wherever it was trapped. For some reason, Beth and Bud focused in on the origin of the sounds. They both went to great lengths to explain how it had seemed to come from the direction of the ticket booth. They usually heard it when they were up in the balcony. One time Beth had been in the ticket booth itself, which just sat in from the street in a large entrance way open to the weather, and had heard the screaming coming from directly above her, from the other side of the ceiling, and perhaps coming from the rooms directly above. I asked the obvious question, did they know of anyone who'd been walled up alive in the theater? I asked this, of course, but the story seemed to indicate that a spirit of a woman was trapped in some way in the offices or ceiling above the ticket booth. Square brackets more. On the next page. The answer? Quote unquote, well, a workman was killed when the lyric was getting built. ... Not the answer I'd expected, but it did make me stop and think. If ghosts did haunt the place they died, it might mean that some of the quote-unquote paranormal activity in the theater might be caused by the ghost of that workman. And, in fact, there were some stories that made one think again of this workman who'd been killed there. Beth said that she sometimes heard a man stomping around on the stairs leading up to the balcony, and sometimes on the old back steps leading from the balcony and projection booth to the street. A good place to hear and sometimes see odd things was the balcony steps. They said if you stood on the steps up to the balcony, still in sight of the candy and drink station in the lobby, you could often feel a chill brush past you, and now and then you'd be able to hear and see faint mutterings and shadows from up above. Bud had several stories concerning voices he'd heard in places where he could definitely attest that no customers or lyric employees had been. He said that he had once or twice been up in the balcony and heard a voice speaking quietly to itself down in the main seating area, in the area of seats nearest the screen. He'd looked out from the balcony and seen absolutely no one anywhere out in the seats. And yet there was this quiet voice speaking to itself, with the lyric locked up tight so no one could get out without a key. It would have been tough for someone to hide there to fake the quote-unquote ghost and then sneak out after Bud had left. And what would have been the point? Beth and Bud were both so blasé about the whole mess that anyone who stayed behind in the lyric night after night to try to startle them would quickly have gone mad, watching Beth and Bud yawn and lock the place up and leave night after night. A similar story involved a man and woman talking in the balcony one night when Bud was tidying up downstairs. He started up the balcony steps to take care of the movie and heard them talking and waited a few minutes for them to resolve their conversation and head on out. When they didn't come down past him, he went on up and found the balcony area empty. Since the back steps leading down to the street required one key to get out of the building, the people couldn't have gotten out. So either they had hidden themselves in one of the dead-end passages of the back stairs or in the crawl space above the projection booth, neither of which sounded likely, or they had vanished into thin air. The idea of anyone staying around after closing night might have made sense if the lyric had anything worth stealing, but it didn't. The projectors were these massive, far too heavy to move pieces of equipment that used carbon arcs for lighting. Wandering into the projection booth was like wandering into a mad scientist's workshop. And if a thief had found him or herself there, the first reaction would likely have been to curse at the junk, and head for the exit. Vandalism was by far the greater problem for the lyric management and employees. People would tear most anything apart if it was left out for anyone to get their hands on the next morning. That nothing substantial ever turned up, smashed, or wrecked by some quote-unquote stay-laters makes me think that some other explanation was square brackets more. Next page. Needed to explain the lyric, quote-unquote, ghosts. None was forthcoming at the time, and since Beth and Bud had no explanation, either save that it might possibly have something to do with her great-grandfather, who had spent a lot of time in his life, we went on to talk about other subjects. A few nights later, Beth and Bud were in fairly perky moods when I dropped by, and Bud asked me if I wanted to see what was behind the screen. Sure, I said, not really expecting anything in particular, but willing to look. Once we had closed up, Bud led the way to the right-hand emergency exit passageway and opened a locked panel a few feet above the door in the left-hand wall. Beth hopped up, and then I climbed up, and Bud followed. We were behind the screen, in the vast emptiness of the old stage. It was fairly dark, but Bud turned on a few lights and revealed just how large it was. High above us, if you turned to look, there were openings that led into rooms or something, but there was no way to get to them. I pointed and asked, and Beth told me, and those were the old dressing rooms used when the theater had offered stage productions. The stairs and catwalks that led to the dressing rooms were long gone. Bud said he had been up and in them, finding nothing all that exciting to look at, but I didn't think to ask how he'd gotten up there because he was leading us over to another locked square brackets more. Next page. Panel. This one in the floor of the stage near the middle of the screen. Bud opened the panel, and looking down into the opening, I saw just Bud said that if you jump down, you'd find yourself in a tunnel leading along underneath the stage. I said. For some reason, none too enthusiastic about jumping down into a pitch-black tunnel leading into the bowels of a darkened theater. A friend and I once got some flashlights and went down there. It was a spooky as hell. Bud placed a great deal of emphasis on the phrase, quote-unquote, spooky as hell. I could see why. It was dark down there. We crawled down the tunnel till we got to this grate. It felt cold, like there was something just beyond it, waiting for someone to come through. Anticlimactically, he finished, We got the hell out of there. Why don't you shut the hatch? I suggested. Beth grinned at me, and Bud shut the hatch. Once it was shut, Bud pointed out that the old orchestra pit was still down the theater. If you stood in the front row of seats, there was a semicircular area of floor between the seats and the screen where the old pit had, square brackets more, stage, been covered over. Bud theorized that the tunnel beneath the stage might well have led to the covered over orchestra pit. The grate might have been the entrance to the pit. We had just been talking about the voices in the seats that Bud had heard one night, and I think we all started to wonder if there might have been any connection between the voices and what I privately thought of as the quote-unquote malevolent force beyond the grate. Perhaps someone was buried under the floor in the old orchestra pit. Once our thoughts started down that avenue, we could keep coming up with new ways to scare ourselves. So we got out of there and locked the stage access panel back. Before we left that night, Bud showed me the boiler room, located beneath the stage and accessed through a panel at the back of a little niche that seemed made for a garbage can to sit in, there in the emergency exit corridor. That was when I found out about Russell's popcorn. The drum was 3/4 full, and a whole stack of empty, soiled popcorn tubs was sitting next to it. I wondered how an aged man such as Russell would be able to get the drum of popcorn out when the time came to take it off to feed to his quote-unquote pups. Perhaps he emptied it into smaller containers. One might never know. One day the popcorn would be there, and the next night it would be gone. It was a few evenings before we resumed our explorations of the haunted areas of the lyric. Back up in the balcony one night, Bud mentioned that if I climbed up on the top of the tank of the old disconnected commode that sat in a closet off the projection booth, I could get up to a place above the booth, looking out over the square brackets more suspended ceiling of the theater itself. Not to be a coward, I climbed up, getting quite dirty from the accumulated soot and dust as I climbed up out of the closet and into a dark area lined with cinder blocks beneath the metal support beams. There was a whole stack of old, warped records up there, and I took a few and hopped it back down into the booth to see if any of them had familiar artists. None did. They were all the quote-unquote Johnny Doe Band, or quote-unquote Jackie Sings, with faded colored jackets and dates from the 1940s and 1950s. I assumed that they'd once have been used to provide music for the theater, but they would have been stowed up in the ceiling. Who knew? I climbed back up and past the stack of records and looked over a low wall of cinder blocks where the projection booth wall continued up on past its ceiling, and looked out over the top of the theater. In the dim vastness of the theater, I could see metal struts and beams, all supporting the weight of the ceiling and lighting. And far across the theater, at the stage end, I could see a catwalk of some sort. Once I'd noticed it, I could see it running back toward me, stopping part way across. I assumed that it might have been there for changing of lights or something. Or for some reason, though my imagination started to click, wondering who or what might be out there on the catwalk. Before I knew it, I was half imagining something coming along the catwalk toward me, something headless and dark. I ducked back down and into the projection booth, having actually seen nothing, but having managed to spook myself considerably nevertheless. Back down in the balcony, after we had left the projection booth, I asked Bud what was on the other side of a door. Square brackets more. Continuing the story. That one could see in the balcony wall, half blocked by chairs and painted over. I'd asked this before, but forgotten his answer. He replied that it led to the offices, he thought, although he didn't remember which office had a door that didn't go anywhere. I'd never been up in the Lyric offices, which looked out over the theater marquee, since there wasn't any way to get from the Lyric proper into them. You had to go out to the street, down past Carol Lee Donuts, and back in another entrance, and led to a stairway and up to the offices. Bud said he'd take me up there sometime. It was nothing all that exciting, he said, but I just wanted to look around. So a couple of weeks later, I asked Bud if he'd show me around up there, since he'd just gotten that he'd come in early the next afternoon, to set up a new movie. He said, "Sure, come on by, and we'll go look." So I did. I found Bud up in the projection booth, about 5:30 in the afternoon. He left what he was doing, and we went back out to the street and up to the offices. The offices themselves were pretty humdrum. Typical dusty old offices, and pictures and things from Beth's father's high school days, and even further back than that. Bud then showed me the rest of the rooms, after having showed me each of the offices. We went into a storeroom full of junk, passing right by another door as we went. I stopped and opened the door we'd passed by. Dark. That was my first reaction. The hallway was none too well lit, and the room beyond the door was not lit at all. More than that, it seemed to be full of a kind of inky blackness. I kid you not when I say that I felt a kind of awareness in the room. I was still standing there, staring worriedly into the room with the hair on the back of my square brackets more neck standing up. When Bud came back, having noticed I was not following behind him, quote unquote, "Joel, I would close that door." I closed it. I looked at Bud and said, "Ack." He nodded and said, "I know. That was why I passed that door by." I looked at him, then at the door. "Wow," was all I could say. We poked around a little more, but it really wasn't that impressive a place. It was just a set of offices with old movie schedules and projector parts and boxes of cups sitting around, except for the door. When we left and went back into the theater, I was thinking furiously. One thing, that room was just precisely situated to be on the far side of the painted shut door in the balcony wall. For another, it was more or less right above the ticket booth. For a third, it seemed alive, or perhaps dead would be a better way of putting it. Well, whatever it added up to, I left the theater that day certain that I would not go into that room for any amount of money, not unless I had about 6 floodlights and a Bible and a crucifix and about 6 gallons of holy water with me. I don't know what works against ghosts, but I was fairly sure once one was in there, and that was good enough for me. Square brackets more. This concludes part 2. The next section will be the Lyric Theater, part 3, the Lyric Today. The Kelseys sold the Lyric to HCMF a few months later, shortly after Beth's grandfather passed away. Brackets. I think that was it. And I happened to be driving one night, just as Beth and Bud and Mr. and Mrs. Kelsey were leaving the theater for the last time. I didn't know what was it, but Beth looked pretty upset. And with all 4 of them leaving the theater on a weeknight around 10 o'clock, I felt something had to be up. I parked and got out of my car and walked down to where they were standing, talking to each other. Bud told me that they had just done their last walkthrough of the lyric. The next day, they'd given the keys to the HCMF people, and that would be that. They'd essentially given the lyric to the HCMF in return for canceling all the accumulated debts. Brackets, I think. None of them were exactly happy about it, and there was nothing I could say that would cheer things up. With the sale of the lyric, Beth and Bud suddenly had 3 more nights a week to do things in. So from that standpoint, it was nice for them. They had not been getting paid for their time, so they didn't even lose money in the process. HCMF tried to keep the lyric open using the old lyric staff who'd worked for Beth and Bud and the Kelseys. Even with staff that knew the operation, there was just no way you could make money at it. Even without having to pay themselves rent, the amount that they had to make to pay off the movie distribution companies each week, or if they could make any profit, was way more than they could take in each week. Square brackets more. The Lyric Theater continued, part 3. The process. HCMF tried to keep the lyric open using the old lyric staff who'd worked for Beth and Bud, but even with staff, they knew the operation there was just no way you could make money at it. Even without having to pay themselves rent, the amount that they had to make to pay off the movie distribution companies each week before they could make any profit was way more than they could take in each week. Eventually, the lyric closed its doors for good and wound up being used only when Virginia Tech needed it for some reason. The Virginia Tech Union showed films there for a while. Brackets, even going so far as to sell the incredibly stale candy that had been left over from when the Kelseys had owned it. When the student center on campus reopened, that was it. Since the Lyric occupies the center of a block with apartments above, parts of it, and stores all around it, no one can just go in and demolish and build something on the site. So until someone comes up with the money to gut the insides and put something else there, or comes up with the wherewithal to restore the theater and use it for theatrical productions or something people would come to, the Lyric will remain closed and shuttered with only its ghosts for company. Copyright 1989, Joel Furr. Square brackets, please press space.
Theater, an interactive night of horror. Copyright 1995 by Cave Rock Software Limited. All rights reserved. Press any key to continue. ...